Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the American University of Kuwait, I'd like to welcome you all to the fourth presentation of the Faculty Speaker Series for this academic year. For those of you who are joining us for the first time this afternoon, the aim of this series is to showcase faculty expertise and to provide a platform for university community dialogue and debate. Before we start, I would like to thank our President, Dr. Rawda Awwad, for her leadership and continuous support of faculty research endeavors. I would like to thank Dr. Fatima Shibli, the co-chair of the Faculty Speaker Series. Our appreciation also goes out to our colleagues in the IT and PR departments for providing the support to make this event happen. Our speaker today is Assistant Professor Clark Stoeckley. He's from the College of Arts and Sciences. He will be presenting Interdisciplinary Art Practice, an artistic journey of 15 years. And this is a brief background on our presenter. Clark Stoeckley is an interdisciplinary artist working in photography, drawing, mural painting, performance video, and interactive media. His latest work includes photographs of stray cats in the Middle East and vibrant geometrical abstract paintings. He has exhibited at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., Pratt Manhattan Gallery, New York City, Contemporary Art Museum of St. Louis, Emily Harvey Foundation Gallery, New York City, Kunsthal, Charlottenburg, Copenhagen, I hope I've said that right, Hardware, Medien, Kunstvarian, Dortmund, Revolts Gallery, Teos, and the Contemporary Art Platform in Kuwait. His work has also been featured in Art News, Hyperallergic, New York Magazine, Associated Press, Newsweek, The Nation, Los Angeles Times, The Guardian, Vice, PBS, and the Wall Street Journal. As a courtroom artist, he authored a graphic novel, The United States versus Private Chelsea Manning. He earned an MFA in Performance and Interactive Media Arts from Brooklyn College and a BFA in Studio Art from Webster University. He previously taught at Bloomfield College in New Jersey and is currently an assistant professor of art and graphic design at the American University of Kuwait. Clark, the floor is yours. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me, and thank all of you for letting me share my work with you for this next 30 minutes to an hour. So I'm going to be giving a very fast-paced survey of everything I've been working on for the past 15 years. And it's been called, Sharifa called it the art presentation for the TikTok generation. So let me get that started here. You can see my screen. Correct? All right. So to tell this story correctly, I'm going to have to go back to when I was in college, my senior year, spring of 2005. I was working on my thesis project. And at the time, my brother had just gone to Iraq to serve his second tour of duty. And I had a lot of conflict with the idea of war. And but it was still very abstract to me in a lot of ways. And I wanted to depict war in an abstract way. And here I've depicted the shadows of a chess game using two opposing light sources. And where you see the chess pieces come together and collide. And thinking more about war, I wanted to actually visualize war in such a way that we could see it on the global scale. We could visualize data. And what I've done here with this Average World project is I've averaged every nation's flag colors. So here the big ones are China and then India. The third is the United States. And you only see so much with population data, but what you really see are wars within the Olympics. You see countries boycott the Olympics. You see home field advantage. You see the Cold War. You see the end of the Soviet Union, and you see the rise of Russia. You see this more so in the Winter Olympics because you see a lot of Northern Hemisphere countries, European countries And you saw that black mark there. That was the year that Russia didn't have a flag. And this project is now developed into something I'm thinking about within the United States. So in 2020, Mississippi voted to change their state's flag to no longer have the stars and bars of the Confederacy. And so currently I'm working on an animation that shows the annexation of the United States from 13 colonies to 50 states. After I graduated undergrad, I traveled around the United States and stenciled the word vote in the style of Robert Indiana's Love design. And so reappropriating this design for 3 years, you can see my map there of all the roads I traveled, going around and spray painting this, making murals, putting up stickers and making T-shirts, buttons. You traveled to 32 different states and eventually ended up in Brooklyn, New York, where I started going to grad school. This project initially ended on November 4th, 2008, the night that Barack Obama became our 44th president. And I thought I was done with it. I thought I was retired. It was something I had my fill of. However, the summer of 2020, I found myself wanting to revisit the project. And I was in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And so I found mural space and put up some murals. So I'll show you those right here. This is in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And so there was this 12-year hiatus of this project that I thought was complete, and it kind of reminded me that no project, so even the average world, average nation projects, can come back at a later point. Now at this point in 2008, I had just moved to New York City. I was studying performance interactive media art at Brooklyn College, and we had the Great Recession happening at the same time, and all these banks were getting bailed out. And so a couple of my classmates and I decided to go down to the stock exchange, pretend to be bankers and hedge fund managers, busking for money. And soon we ended up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and CNN and C-SPAN, and all of these journalists were reporting us to be these bankers. And we were kind of pointing out the absurdity of all these banks getting bailed out. Meanwhile, regular people were having their homes foreclosed. We continued this project for 2 years. Just would go down and I'd start juggling. My friend Adam would do his pogo stick routine. And we always had a third guy who collected change and held the sign. And that eventually evolved into the Army of Fun. We moved up to Times Square, to the Armed Forces Recruiting Center, which is right there in the background. And here we were trying to satirize the romanticization of military propaganda, especially that which is geared towards children, in order to get them to join, get them to sign up. And so we're kind of trying to, jam that message in such a way to make people on the street question what they were seeing. And so we call ourselves the Army of Fun because war is never fun, right? That leads me to kind of my last street art spray paint project, Liberty and Justice for All. Probably, to me, the most important lines of the Pledge of Allegiance. And so I've painted as murals. This was a truck that was at Occupy Wall Street. This is at the Burning Man Arts Festival in Nevada. This was accompanied with photographs of those who have had the experience of migrating into the United States from the southern border. Also, when I was in grad school, my first year, I decided to make a documentary, this short documentary about these two, we'll call them artists, squatters living on a forbidden island just off the coast of Key West. There's no trespassing sign that I have in my office. If you ever come visit my office, I'll show it to you. What I wanted to do was depict how these guys essentially lived off of very little in paradise. And they lived on this island that had a sister island, which had the most expensive homes in all of Florida, with a very exclusive resort homes. And meanwhile, just 100 meters away, there are these two guys that built these shrines and art installations and a miniature golf course, all out of found objects from things that were washed up from hurricanes, things that were left behind. And they turned garbage into this absolutely amazing place that was actually kind of a bit more exclusive. You had to know it was there. And so then I submitted this to quite a few different film festivals. It played in venues such as theaters as well as galleries, and dealing with everything from the idea of being a hermit to also reusing materials to make new things. Shortly after I graduated from Brooklyn College, I was invited to speak at the College Art Association conference, and I did so dressed as a New York City police officer, and I talked about New York City pranksters that had done performance art, activism, and graffiti. And I did a very deadpan performance. The panel was called The Art of Pranks. It was written up in Art News with the writer believing that I was actually part of the NYPD. And then I've been asked to kind of give that, shortly thereafter I gave that lecture at different art schools. This next project is probably what I'm most infamous or famous for, depending on who you ask. In 2011, I bought this box truck and decorated it to say the WikiLeaks Top Secret Mobile Information Collection Unit. On the back, it was asking for Private Manning's release. And I did this because there was all this debate as to whether WikiLeaks was actually a journalistic organization. I certainly felt they were. The only thing that they were lacking was a news van. And so I brought it to Washington, D.C. first. And then after several months of driving around the D.C. area, I brought it up to New York, and it eventually expanded the fleet through connections I made through Twitter, and either decorated the vehicles for people who would come to me, or I was shipping these to Australia, the UK, and elsewhere, and created this fleet. And it was about that time I started working for the Chelsea Manning Support Network as their graphic designer, and not just creating graphics by digital means, but also hand painted signs, and also organizing people to come to the trial that was happening at Fort Meade near DC. And so you can see here, pretty much all the signage was reused for multiple protests. And it was over the course of 3 years, this trial took place. And so, we had to reuse this quite a bit. After the protests would happen early in the morning, I would go into the trial, and I had credentials as a courtroom artist. And this afforded me the privilege of sitting on either side of the courtroom, in the jury box, as well as the media live feed building, which was a mile away. And so I would go back and forth between all of those spaces to get as many different angles as possible. And over the course of 3 years, I did over 300 drawings. And this was something that was kind of very new to me. I was not a fan of drawing people. It wasn't something I ever wanted to do. It was something I felt needed to be done. And the reason was no cameras were allowed in the courtroom, and there was no regular, established media courtroom artist. And so I wanted the story to be told visually. And so that meant I had to attend, I had to show up and record everything I could. And I received a book deal through Julian Assange organized a book deal with his publisher. And then I spent the next 6 months after the trial ended in the summer of 2013, editing over 35,000 pages of court documents and transcripts into 200 pages of concise yet comprehensive look that shows both sides of this story. Even though I was clearly very biased, I wanted you to understand what was happening and why Manning was facing life in prison, received 35 years in jail. And then what the story doesn't quite tell is that Barack Obama granted her clemency after serving 7 years in prison, which included her first month was here in Kuwait in a cage in a tent in the middle of July, out in the middle of the desert, to 9 months in the Quantico Marine Brig in solitary confinement. Things that the judge found in her favor that resulted in unusual pretrial confinement. The book has been translated into Turkish, and the drawings have since toured to galleries in New York, Newark, New Jersey, St. Louis, Denmark, and Germany. Over the collection here is 286 drawings framed together into 24 large frames with mats. And it was a story I never wanted to tell, but it was one that I absolutely felt needed to be told. So this work ended up getting me some more work regarding cases of WikiLeaks sources. And so I covered the hearings of Jeremy Hammond, Hector Xavier Monsegur, as well as journalist Barrett Brown. So this work I was doing for Vice, and these were very short hearings. I would go to one hearing for a couple hours once every 6 months. And so it was a very different experience. And that kind of brings me to my last project in New York. And so Chess Draw was a performance where I would go down to Union Square and I would set up a chessboard right along the gauntlet of chess players. And I would also draw people's portraits. So you have chess players playing for money, you have character artists doing portraits for money, but I was going to do both of them for free at the same time. And I was going to play as passively as possible. Like, what would it be like if a pacifist played chess? So I kept my pieces as close together, never attacked my opponents. And I tried to incentivize my opponents to become pacifists as well on the board. And the way I did that was, I was going to draw your portrait, but the portrait would end when I when the game came to a conclusion. And so if you beat me really quickly, because everyone beat me, you would get a portrait that was unfinished. But if you caught on to the fact that I wasn't going to attack you, that there's twice as many spaces on the board as there are pieces, then we can have a conversation. And you're going to get a much better portrait. So you'll see the results here. Most people picked up on it, but there's a few that didn't quite get the message. So this was an amazing experience to just draw strangers, complete strangers who were willing to sit down and take some time with me at no cost. So the portraits were free. I gave them away. And then we had this experience and discussion about everything. Oftentimes it would lead back to the the discussion of war and whether it was actually necessary, or if we are programmed to believe that we must attack each other. And then I was hired here at AUK, and I came to Kuwait August of 2016. And the really popular game that year was Pokemon Go. And people were going all over the streets trying to catch these Pokemon with their phone. And I decided, well, there's these cats. I don't need Pokemon. There's cats everywhere. And I began photographing street cats at a very low angle in Kuwait. And then I started traveling across the GCC, to Turkey, to Southeast Asia, and so forth. And this became my travel photography. I started an Instagram account and I posted at least one cat a day, sometimes more. And I think I'm just over 2,800 cat photos or posts, some with multiple photos, since 2016. And these cats are a metaphor to me of resiliency, of migration, of they are the survivors. They are not the pampered cats of Instagram that have owners. They are the cats that are born into this life of scavenging, of making do with what they can find. And so then this project has culminated into a solo show, but I'm forever working on a book of my favorite street cat photos from all over Egypt to Istanbul, all over Kuwait. It just also reminds me, how lucky we are. In 2019, I did this series of paintings. This is a painting, this is a painting, and this is a painting, period. And I got that out of my system. Also in 2019, I did, this is actually just some concept art for a residency at Isle Royale National Park, the least visited national park in the United States. It's only open in the summertime. And I just actually applied for it again this year because it's been canceled for a couple of years. But to stay on the island and photograph all of the architecture and then come back and illustrate it for a guidebook. Shortly before COVID, I started taking photographs of migrant workers here in Kuwait on their day off on Fridays. This is a project that was inspired by Khalid Al-Bay's Doha Fashion Fridays. And with his permission and blessing, he encouraged me to start the project here. And the project, actually, literally, this was just weeks before COVID hit. I started photographing these individuals, interviewing them, sending them, emailing them their photograph. And I have not yet gone to posting it publicly yet. But it's a project that I hope to actually get back into. Khalid has actually gotten back into the project in Doha just in the past 2 weeks. And so now that I think things are settling down with COVID, I intend to go full on with, telling these stories of people from all over Asia and Africa who come here to work, and this is how they express themselves in their own fashion. The one day that they're not wearing a uniform or expected to dress a certain way. And so, I think it's important to, it humanitizes the the people that we see every day, the essentially invisible population. And that brings me to COVID. In the spring of 2020, I had to quickly adapt how I was teaching my classes in such a way where I started creating time-lapse tutorials of the drawing process. And so I purchased a phone mount that I could start capturing my work, and that's how I taught. And so this combination of drawings was actually for my Drawing 1 class tutorial. And so with this, I started talking about how do we combine things? How do we create something new out of the ready-made? So this is the most famous piece of ready-made Duchamp artwork, his fountain, right? And we have Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. And so what would happen if the waterfall came into the urinal and filled it up? And so actually showing this progression of water building, alluding essentially to rising water from global warming. And so once I did that, I was like, well, what else? What's Duchamp's other famous piece? It would have to be his bicycle wheel. And what happens if I mix that with Marina Abramovich and Yule's Rest Energy performance, where she held a bow and he held the arrow? And what if they were trying to balance on this bicycle wheel that's on a stool that's been turned upside down? So it was this idea of how to bring multiple ideas together. And then the final piece that I created for that class in the spring of 2020 was this idea of erasure, removing these statues of the Confederacy. So I found this Civil War tourist guide, and I started removing the statues. And this was in the May of 2020. George Floyd was murdered 2 weeks later. And many of these statues started to actually come down. As I mentioned, I was in Minnesota at the time. And my last day in Minneapolis before, I think this part deserves a moment of silence. So my last day before coming back to Kuwait, just after getting my PCR test, but before I got on the plane, went down to George Floyd Square, the ground zero of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I wanted to depict all of the artwork I saw without the protest, without the groups of people. That series of photographs I've sent to Drury University, for example, for an exhibition that auctioned off the work and raised money for scholarships for BIPOC students. And that leads me to Thoughts and Prayers, my last project that I'm going to show you today. This project is, although it started in 2019, it became my pandemic body of work. This is what I did in quarantine. And it's this culmination of all these influences in my life, from street art and graffiti and psychedelic art to modern art movements like Orphism, to now here being in the Middle East, visiting mosques, and finding a deep appreciation for Islamic geometry and design. But viewing it in such a way that everything is asymmetrical. Everything's distorted, bent, and twisted. Nothing is perfect. And that the beauty is really in the imperfections and how things adapt to their surroundings. And essentially, it's the idea of mutation. And we've seen mutations, and we've seen things spread, specifically this virus. And so I wanted to visualize all of these things together in one space. And so it started with ink and colored pencil drawings. And this summer, I had a residency in Taos, New Mexico at the Revolt Gallery. And that's where I decided to actually put the drawing pad away and work with spray paint and kind of get back to my roots of painting with aerosol. And I made a variety of murals. This hut right here became a prayer room of, I also viewed it as kind of like living inside my head. And so this became the first like immersive space that this body of work adapted to. So I worked on this project actually over the course of the whole summer, and added more to it over time. And then here is one of the first murals I painted in Taos. And this one was, I was really trying to depict this idea of the spread of a virus with variants. And so these connections, one connection leading to the next, and building these layers up and also masking it through line. And so what started as these circles now becomes very hard edge with the hard lines. And so you can kind of see the process here. And I think it really comes from, I guess one of the things that, the good things for me that came out of COVID was this, and the online teaching, was I needed to record my process, because the process I think is actually more interesting than the final piece. To see how a piece spreads across the picture plane, to see how it takes shape, and so that's really kind of the direction I see a lot of my work going forward. As I've shown you a variety of work, but I've been searching for something that I can continue with and develop, and I think this might be it. I think I'm going to spend some time with it. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Clark, for your presentation. It was very interesting. I don't have any artistic streaks like you, but it was nice to see all the work that you've done over the years. We will open the floor now for questions. If any of our audience has any comments or questions that they would like to ask Clark. Any questions? Sherry?
I mean, there's a lot of stories behind those projects.
Sherry Smith.
No, sorry, I was just applauding Clark because I heard a lot of new stories this time. It was really enjoyable. I always enjoy hearing artist inspiration, but his are from a perspective that I've never heard before. So thank you so much, Clark. It was really, really fascinating.
Thank you.
Dr. Iyad?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Clark, for the nice presentation. It's amazing that I see how many things that you did related to art. So my question is, why you think you did that kind of diversification of the artwork? So I saw that you did painting, photography, graffiti, so many different things, and each one by itself is, like, you can say, an art. So, and which one of them you like the most?
I always like the next thing I'm working on. Whatever I'm currently working on, like I always like the next, right? You know, fortunately, contemporary artists, even you look at Andy Warhol. I just was watching the Andy Warhol diaries, and contemporary artists have kind of given us permission to not get stuck into a certain style. And I've given myself permission to not do that. Now, commercially, that's not good advice. If you're looking for commercial success in the capital A art world, they want you to find a style and stick with it and just evolve it very slowly. I think there's quite a few reasons for the diversification. Possibly it's because I get bored, but also things have their time. You know, my coverage of the WikiLeaks trials, you know, had a time. The voting for me, you know, was very specific to an election year. You know, I didn't start photographing stray cats until I got here because I just didn't encounter them. And so I think it's because my work responds to the time and the place, the community I'm in, and what's going on. And so oftentimes, I guess I think about what is the end product, and I reverse engineer it. And I say, okay, well, that's, you know, I'm going to have to take up this genre or this media to make that happen. And then also, I think to be truly creative, you have to allow yourself to be free from everything that you made prior, and be willing to. Reinventing myself is I think just so much more fun, and you only live once. And so I think those are like my top 10 reasons. But there are times, it seems maybe 2 or 3 times a year, there are times where I get caught just like, man, I have too many different things going. I've done too many different things. It's hard to like build that audience. You know, I walked away from a Twitter account based on my WikiLeaks work, and an entire group of following to start an Instagram of cat photos. And so I guess for me, it's allowed me to introduce my work to completely different groups of people, different communities, and see kind of who kind of crosses over, who sticks with me because they just want to know what's next. And I like surprising myself. And that's the only way to really do it, is to find something new to become interested about, and really dive into it and become kind of as much of an expert about it as you can. So, but that's a great question. It's something I think about all the time. So,
Claire, please go ahead.
Thanks, Clark, for that great presentation. It's great to see all of it. I just wanted to know, how do you think being in academia has influenced your art, or provided opportunities, or, you know, how would you, perhaps it's the eclectic nature that it has contributed to, but I'd like to hear what you have to say about that, being in academia.
Well, to be honest, it's given me the freedom to diversify, right? As I mentioned before, commercial success comes from that recognizable style and image that an artist carries for decades. And I guess watching my dad as an artist stick with this style for decades and not evolve, not change, not diversify, that, you know, I kind of grew up with this unique situation of parents who pushed me to be an artist. You know, they encouraged it way too much. They, however, discouraged me from going into academia. Being a college professor is the rebellion against my parents. So I guess on that personal note, but also, you know, academia is, I'm in academia because I love to learn as much as I love to teach, if not more so. And so that's like, every project is a learning experience for me. And if I didn't diversify, I wouldn't learn, you know, what I've learned in the past 5 years about photography. And what I've learned in the past 2 years about abstract art is, because I have never been a fan of abstract art, and I'm still slowly starting to become a fan of my own work, but it takes, it's a process to get there.
Thank you, Claire. Dr. Fatima.
Thank you, Clark, for this great presentation. I loved it, to be honest. I don't have a question. I just have a quick comment. I loved the chess game that you made. The message that you were trying to make with the war, and then personally living the war in the childhood basically affected me, and it's gonna all affect me all my life. So the way you presented this message through the chess game and the portrait and so on and so forth, I really love the idea. So how you can actually send messages through art is just amazing. So just quick comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ali.
Yes, Clark, let me admit that you changed my perspective to art. So I saw your background picture several times in some meetings before, and always it sparked the question in my mind, what is it? And now when I saw your presentation, I like the idea of the asymmetry story and connecting the layers to history. So you start somewhere, then you end somewhere else, maybe. So this raised a question in my mind. What decides the final piece of your art? Is it your emotions or reality?
Ooh. Well, you know, I kind of mentioned that I like to start with the image in my mind and then kind of work backwards. And so, but I guess it also depends on the project as well. I'm trying to depict a reality through my own lens, right? So when I was a courtroom artist, I became the camera. My eyes were the lens, my brain was the camera body, and my hand became the printer. And you know, and when I was doing that, I was just trying to have the daily news out, like an image. You know, I was putting these images out. In fact, I was breaking news headlines on Twitter because I was the only person in the media room that didn't have a 5 o'clock deadline to get to press. I was unaffiliated in some respects, and so I could break the story in 140 characters along with an illustration. In some cases, I'm trying to encourage behavioral change, or to see the world differently, or see it through the way I see it. Where I see a chessboard, I see twice as much space as we need. Where I see, where you might see these pesky vermin on the street, you know, I see a soul, and I see a survivor, and I see, you know, a cat that is lived a much harder life than any of the domesticated animals that we have. And so, you know, with this, specifically the abstract work, I've been always kind of drawing these shapes, but putting color to it was really what it needed. And I would say what's different about this work is that I have vague ideas of how it's going to end, but it's like the first time that the process really it develops, and I'm making decisions through it that I haven't made before. Whereas most projects were very conceptual and I just had to get from that point to the next. Whereas now there's a conversation constantly going on in my head. There's a constant like push and pull with every shape. You change, every angle has to now make room for the previous angle and the next one. And so, you know, I start with a few different kind of concepts, or maybe a couple rules.
Yes.
And then I also start breaking those rules and allowing things to not end up as perfect and as symmetrical as.
And also, like,
expect.
I mean, it was always ending up sometimes differently than it started. Therefore, I was curiously to know, is it like sometimes, you know, real life situations, or you have like a certain direct emotion toward an end, or it's always like a fight or a debate inside yourself, which.
I think it's kind of the last two.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely, you know, it's every time I step back, I now have this conversation that I wasn't having while I was putting paint on the wall or
Yeah.
you know, ink and pencil on the paper. And so, you know, there's a lot of kind of stepping back and saying what colors are going to be adjacent to each other.
Sure.
And making sure that there's this diversity of color. And also it's kind of spread equally balanced across the picture plane.
But it's amazing. I really love it. The way you do it, it's not like the way which is popular in art, you know, like someone is standing there and stand the picture, finish it some time later. So I would say it's dynamic, adaptive, let's say, to our real life. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. Federico.
Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
Okay, thank you, Claire, for a wonderful talk. Listen, I was just, I just want to sort of go back to Ali's question, no, of you are an artist that wants to call society to a dialogue, no? So you have this idea of especially the early paintings, no, the mural paintings, no, where you saw yourself as an artist that wanted to instigate a dialogue. I mean, you're an artist on the streets, no? Mm-hmm. and I found that fascinating. And I wonder if the latest period is more of an introspection, no? That you have stopped that dialogue and you're just going into yourself, looking for something else.
Certainly, this latest work is the result of being quarantined. So you probably have put together that, you know, my work was, I always say, is best experienced in two public spaces, the streets and the internet. And I'm fond of, I consider those places to be more sacred than any gallery or museum, because they reach people, not just the art world. And that's my goal, is to reach people who don't expect it, or may not necessarily have the access or feel intellectually, you know, superior enough to like go into a museum. There's a huge firewall there of whether you feel comfortable, even if the museum is free, that you just don't feel that you know enough about art to feel comfortable in that space. And so, you know, I've tried to bridge the internet to the streets. And so that's why I took WikiLeaks and put it on the street, right? Everything we knew about WikiLeaks was on the internet. And now I'm taking the cats from the street and putting them on the internet, and trying to have that connection and that back and forth has always been a goal. But COVID, I mean, for 7 months, I didn't photograph a cat. And I have to adapt to the times or the place where I'm at. And that's, you know, yeah, COVID completely changed everything for me, but I allowed myself to say, okay, this is an election year. I'm in a swing state. I need to paint some murals that I haven't done for 12 years. Or, you know, and allow myself to revisit things or put things aside for a while. And as Claire kind of brought up, like, you know, academia has given me that freedom. You know, that's kind of the support I need to not make art for commercial success only. And so I've had some commercial success. I had, you know, most of this work has been funded by the work I sold before I was 25. I didn't show you all that, but you know, it's very commercial, very, you know, and then my biggest sellers in the past couple of years were this is a painting and some of this more abstract work. But I don't, like, the goal isn't necessarily to sell it. It's more to just to be and to have people experience it.
Okay, thank you. Claudia?
Can we take the photo? Just sorry to interrupt. Can we take the photo because people are leaving? If you can take the photo before everyone leaves.
That might be a good idea.
Yes. So if you can turn on your cameras if you want to be okay, if you're ready. So I'll take just 2 or 3. Let me check if it's working. Okay. Okay, the first one worked. Okay, 2 more and then we're good to go. Okay, what happened?
I got the feeling that we are going to be used by Clark in one of his next projects.
This is for PR. We don't know.
Don't worry, don't worry.
We're pausing for him.
Okay. Excellent. Done from my side.
Thank you, Tima.
You're welcome.
Claudia, did you have a question?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you for sharing your work with us. I really love it. And I'm curious to know if living in Kuwait has changed or not your art or your approach to your artwork.
Oh, definitely. I mean, every move I've ever made has changed the work, right? I honestly, I never, ever intended to photograph stray cats. And day one, I walk out of my apartment, there's a dozen cats. And I just started doing it with no real intention of where it would go. But certainly, like, I wouldn't drive a WikiLeaks truck around here. I wouldn't start a protest here. I haven't done any graffiti, and you know, so certainly not doing anything. You know, I've been arrested numerous. I've been arrested like a dozen times. No convictions, but you know, it was from spray painting on a wall to just the whole WikiLeaks truck. I was arrested like within hours of decorating that truck. Secret Service pulled me off the street and whisked me away to a private room where they asked me hours and hours of questions, and came to the realization that I was more of a court jester than the you know, anything of a threat. And so you know, obviously humor has been a huge part of my work, but when it needs to be serious, you know, I still try to keep it serious and kind of play with that, you know, the comedy and tragedy of life and the world. So, but yeah, definitely community changes everything. And you know, moving to New York, prior to that, I wasn't, you know, doing street activism, creative activism in such a way that was, you know, like a protest disguised as some kind of street performance. It just would never have occurred to me. I grew up in a small town of 400 people in the middle of America. And so that was a huge leap, you know, going from a farm to Brooklyn, New York, changed everything. And then definitely moving here changed so much. And you know, yeah, but I think it's good to be able to adapt to your community and to your surroundings than it is to be kind of, stuck in one direction. And I think that can go for like any kind of research, right? Coming here can completely change everything you see and understand and break down stereotypes and you see the differences, but you also see the common threads that bind us as humanity.
Perhaps I could ask the last question before we finish off for this afternoon.
Yeah.
I said I didn't have an artistic streak, but I do come from the business faculty. So I'd like to go back to your days of busking on Wall Street when you were posing as financiers with your friends. And we all know it, there was a time of great public outcry and financial doom. So one, were you well received by the general public out on the street? And two, my real question is, how much did you make each day while you were doing this?
So Andy Warhol said, making money is art and working is art and good business is the best art. And I've been an entrepreneur. I didn't go into it. There was part of the funding for this project has been my projects has been suing the police for when they falsely arrest me. I started a graphic design sticker business from that. And then in college, I started a business selling my own work. And so business is art. When it came to the Wall Street, we made, there were days that we were able to split $300 amongst the three of us. Now we worked a long day. We would have, it was the mixed reactions. The first day, people didn't know what to think. We weren't bothered by the police. I think it has a lot to do with the suit and tie. Every now and again, someone would yell something at us. But oftentimes, tourists were always wanting to get their photo with us, which, that's $1, right? And so, it was kind of funny that we were somewhat protesting capitalism while making money. I never lost the irony in that. When we transferred into the Army of Fun, there was no money to be collected. We were looking to collect children to join, when we did the Army of Fun, the first time we did it was during Fleet Week, and there was a group of military, young, maybe 19, 20-year-old young men who were in New York City, just off the, on their vacation, and they saw us. And at first they were curious. They came back after a day of partying and caught up with us at the end of the day, and they actually wanted to fight us. And we turned that anger into this discussion about, freedom of, like, what are the freedoms that you're supposedly fighting for? And one is this freedom of expression. And when we kind of turned that on its head, we ended up like leaving, shaking hands, and kind of understanding that we were doing something that in many places you can't do. We were protesting in a way, we're protesting the military, and that's, if what their mission is true, as they say it is, they were protecting our rights. And so, but I also think dialogue is what really helps, any situation, see other points of view and so forth.
I really like the way, true to the spirit of, liberal arts and liberal arts education, that you've mixed the artistic side and your entrepreneurial spirit and, the mischievous side of you as well, perhaps. Thank you so much for your presentation today. Thank you for our guests as well for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at the next Faculty Speaker Series. Till then, bye-bye, everybody.